Welcome back to the Shuffle Squad. Zach Lesage here. I'm back from the World Championships. It was a long way back because we had some flight cancellation issues, but I'm back, I'm feeling great, and I want to discuss the World Championships metagame. So if you're playing in locals, your league challenges, league cups, probably going to see a lot of this metagame up here. So let's talk about it. We see that there's some recognized names in the top cut of the event. Riley McKay, who just placed second at NEIC, ends up winning Worlds with Gardevoir. Big surprise. Gardevoir has been on a tear lately, so it's not really a huge surprise to see it winning Worlds. We see Justin Neudorf, long time, I believe, senior division player, and someone who's been grinding online tournaments playing Dragapult Noir. And then we see a bunch of regular culprits up here, strong players like Piper Lapine playing Goldengo, and Landon Kaler, who won a regionals playing Goldengo, and the list kind of goes down from there. So I kind of want to discuss where the metagame's at, and kind of give everyone my piece of my opinion, I guess. So that being said, for this portion, I'm just going to turn off my camera so we can kind of look at these lists. So if we look at a Gardevoir, I think we see what is a pretty standard version of Gardevoir, very similar to what Riley ran at the North American International Championships. There is a Flutter main here now, and I believe a TM de-evolution that's really changed up a little bit, but at the end of the day, it's just text for the current metagame. If you're a Gardevoir player, cards like Technical Machine, de-evolution, and Flutter Mane are not uncommon, and I think that this is a pretty standard list with the 4 monkeys, the 4 darks, etc., etc. We look at Dragapult Noir, and this looks very similar to the lists that have been doing well online. We see the Dragapult line, the Noir line, and the card gets added to the deck is Hilda. The one thing that I think that the best players did at the World Championships was add in a second copy of Jamming Tower. And that's really just to try to stop those air balloons that were very popular at the World Championships. Now, these two are kind of like legacy top 10 decks in terms of, I think that Gardevoir and Dragapult Noir are always going to stay in the top 10. And we also see Raging Bolt, another deck that I think is always just staying in the top 10. However, we are seeing players move away from Slitherwing for Koraidon because Joltik Box isn't as prevalent as it has been in the past. Pretty standard list here. There's cards like the Shen Pao to bump your area 0 to maybe discard some of your bench Pokemon. But other than that, I mean, we're looking at a pretty typical Raging Bolt list. Then we see Charizard. Charizard really kind of started to steal the show a little bit, having some pretty deep runs. Charizard, previously a legacy top 10 deck, but has since kind of been stagnant in the metagame, whereas Dragapult has taken over. I don't think that these lists still beat Dragapult or anything, but the Chi-Yu being fire type and Charizard being dark type does give you an angle against both Goldengo and Gardevoir, giving you a decent shot into the metagame. And of course, as much as this deck's not favorable against Dragapult, it's not completely unfavorable either. It's certainly a winnable matchup. So we also see another player, Oiwin, making top 8 as well with Charizard, seeing some pretty similar lists, however, switching the A spec. Charizard's one of those decks where we've seen it play Prime Catcher, Secret Box, Max Belt, Hero's Cape, Survival Brace. The list goes on and on and on. And this is why I've started to actually carry, I carry an archive, Ultimate Guard archive with all these different techs, including all the different A specs on me, because decks can just really swap out those A specs more often in different tech cards, even like the Pidgey switching from the 60 HP to the 50 HP. I think Charizard's decently positioned in the metagame, but ultimately it falls to some other decks like Raging Bolts, at Dragapult, and Gardevoir can sometimes just get through anything. Surprisingly, we see that there was a couple copies of Enzor in the top, and we see kind of what looks like a standard version mixed with a Terra box, which is really interesting. But Enzor decks look different all the time, and it's honestly something that I thought was going to be one of the most basic decks where you just copy your N-Star Manitan or you copy your Enzor, but it seems like the decks are more popular playing cards like Blood Moon, Water Pawn, Cornerstone to really kind of amp things up. And we can see that there's another version of the deck right here in 8th that plays Toadscruel, giving itself a little bit of an angle against the Goldengo players with its Slime Mold Colony ability. Again, this is one of those cards that I have in my tech kind of archive box of cards. I think Enzor is a very misunderstood deck and confusing deck, even for myself. So it's one of those things where I think you're going to see Enzor continue to evolve or not evolve in many different cases where there's like maybe 10 different ways to play this deck. But again, it's just using Enzor with that trade ability. And then the last deck in our top 8 is Piper playing Goldengo with Togekiss. Now, Togekiss is probably the most interesting portion of this deck, giving yourself the opportunity to use its Wonder Kiss ability. You're probably going to start seeing this card pop up at League Cups. So you flip a coin of heads, take 1 more prize cards. Now, Goldengo doesn't really have a great way to approach the mirror match. However, drawing extra prize cards does give that way. So even if they go after your Togekiss, that's just them taking a 1 prize, or then you could stay on a 2 prize card lane. Therefore, they're pretty much stuck, leaving you to use Wonder Kiss, and a single coin flip can bring you just back into a game that you otherwise would have not been in. So I think Togekiss is interesting. We also saw other versions of this deck. If we scroll down the list a little bit, I'm just looking for I think Caleb Rogerson was the highest placing out of the other group that played it, between John Ang. They played it with Chansey to put Chansey into their prize cards with redeemable tickets, and Cypher Maniac to then have a different way to manipulate the prize cards and draw extra prize cards. I actually think that this is the better version, even though they did not go as far. It's a super close list, just not as refined as I guess as it should be, but I don't know, it's really close. And then you also see the Zacian EX. This is a card that I had to add into my collection because it's a promo, only a promo, coming out pretty recently, but it comes in a pretty expensive tin, so I'd actually recommend picking it up. It's only 50 cents, but they're hard to come across, and I'd be surprised if vendors at like Pittsburgh or Monterey actually had this card for sale. It's a Cornerstone counter with Slashing Strike. So pretty interesting list. Now, if we switch over to the statistics here, if we look at Worlds, this is just day 2 categories. We can see that Goldengo was the most played deck day 1 and day 2. It actually did better going from day 1 to day 2. Dragapult did slightly worse, making it from day 1 to day 2. I played Dragapult at Worlds, so I'm probably to blame for it not necessarily going as far. But when your opponent's ripping you to shreds with Goldengo, it's kind of tough. Gardevoir had a poor conversion rate into day 2, going from 13 to 9%, but still was quite popular, likely due to the success of the deck. Raging Bolt actually had a better conversion in day 2, likely because it has a strong-ish matchup against Goldengo and Charizard. And then we see Marnie's Grimmsnarl fell off the face of the planets, only having 4 copies in day 2, going from a 5% deck to not. And then we see Eevee Box, which went from having a 4% from day 1 to not really making the graphic for day 2. The big decks that kind of went up would be the Charizard deck that ended up not being on the graphic for day 1, being on the graphic for day 2, and straight Dragapult not being on the graphic for day 1 and being on the graphic for day 2. So Goldengo is kind of split into a few categories now. You have the prize card manipulation versions, which I think the Chansey version's better. So we have Piper's there with Togekiss. We see that there's I'm just going to put over here Caleb Rogerson's version. We see this version as well with the Chansey. So I like the Chansey prize card manipulation version a little bit better. We see kind of the straight up versions of the deck. A lot of players cut their Scizor for the Strike It Rich Baby Goldengo. Again, another card that if you don't have, probably not going to be able to find it at the vendors. It's a hard card to pick up. There's no alt version of it. And no vendors really like stocking a card that's worth under 10 cents. So pick it up while you can. And then we see some other versions of the deck. The deck that actually won in the juniors division seniors division at Worlds was this Goldengo Joltik box, kind of a monstrosity of Goldengo and Joltik box kind of mashed together. Not entirely sure on where I want to leave this list at, but it seems pretty cool across the board. Then we see some other versions of the list that's played out there. Like you can see that there was players that were playing Rev of Room in their decks. We see players that were playing they were playing the Rev of Room Fan Rotom Secret Box version of the deck. I think honestly what's going to come down to is the best version of the deck is probably going to either be Goldengo Joltik box, being a side archetype, and then you have just the Goldengo prize manipulation that's going to end up being like this. Now, if you probably are almost always going to need the prize manipulation now because Goldengo is so popular, something to consider as you continuously play this. So that leaves us for Goldengo. Dragapult, we basically have the best list that came second. So if we look at Justin Neudorf's list playing the 2 copies of Jamming Tower, this I think is the default best version of the deck for the foreseeable future. The deck is very chiseled out, iron proof. This is what I'd rock out. If we look at other just kind of straight versions of just Dragapult, I'm just gonna see if I could pull up, I think it was Haru that played this deck. Haru played with, I believe it was Tord, played it with a bunch of cards that block retreat, with Impound here, with corner here. So some decent options, Cornerstone as well. So having some ways to just stop your opponent from doing things. A lot of decks don't have a Cornerstone counter. If we look at things like the Zacian EX promo, that can get through Cornerstone, and a lot of decks just don't have what it takes to get through an Ethan Sudowoodo, stopping them from retreating. Let's say they bring up the Latias or something like that. So interesting choice of the deck. That's probably the second best version. The Dragapult Charizard versions kind of fell off the face of the planet at this tournament. I think what we're going to see is the standard list that we saw from NEIC, maybe tossing in a Hilda, but I don't think it's necessarily recommended because it's not necessarily doing the best against Dragapult decks, and it's not necessarily doing the best against Charizard decks. So if you're a Dragapult Charizard main, it might be time to put that deck away a little bit. If we go into Raging Bolt, which we saw, Raging Bolt did have some strong finishes with players playing the deck. We see All Out Blitzel here, James Kowalski playing the deck, and I think this is going to look really similar to what most lists are going to end up looking. They're very active online. This is what a standard Raging Bolt list looks like. You might be able to add an extra Raging Bolt. You might be able to cut Cornerstone for a Slitherwing, but that's where the cookie kind of crumbles. We have Gardevoir. I think most lists are going to end up looking like Riley McKay's list here. Why not take the World Championships list right into Monterey, Pittsburgh, Frankfurt? This is what we got going on for our list right now. I think most lists might end up cutting the Flutter main to toss an extra Bravery Charm, and maybe cut the TM Devo for a copy of Drifloon. I think that's where I've seen most lists kind of play it. Charizard, I think most lists are going to look very similar to Oywins, who made top 8 at the tournament. However, there is a kind of argument on Twitter to play Matt Backness list with the Ethan's Pichu. Ethan's Pichu being a really cool tech card, doing 30 damage, but you could do 30 damage plus max belts to do 80, plus Dust Noir to knock out a 2 prize card Pokemon. They made a whole Twitter thread about it. Definitely give it a check out. I don't know if it's worth it or not, but they made top 16 at Worlds, so who am I to judge? We did see other versions of the deck, such as Jeremy Gamila's Dragapult Charizard deck. This is a list that did fairly well online before Worlds, but this deck really did not have a strong performance at Worlds. It is a side version, so again, if you're having that kind of stack of cards as you're playtesting your decks, a Precious Charlie might want to be in there. If you're looking for any of these cards, check out our sponsors at Kayfabe Cards, or pick up some codes at ptcglstore.com. And as we continue to go down, Flareon was probably a hit surprise of the World Championships, looking very similar to NEIC. I don't think it really gained too much from this next set, but having access to a fire type, a grass type, and of course Sylveon being psychic type with the Clefairy to knock out any of your opponent's Dragapults really gives you a decent opportunity into the metagame. Again, I see an Air Balloon, so a lot of these decks are, hey, it's the same deck plus Air Balloon. So Flareon box seems like it's well positioned going forward. Grimmsnarl fell off the face of the planet. We're looking at a very similar version of the deck as to what we've seen from Piper's top 8 at NAIC. I think that Grimmsnarl could find its way back into the metagame, but right now it doesn't necessarily compete with the top decks the same way that it once was. I think players figured it out over the summer. Joltik box didn't necessarily go as far as we expected. We see that it had a few day 2 placements. It looked like it was well positioned, but its linear gameplay probably stops it enough to the point where it can't make it all of the way. So Joltik box is probably just going to transform into Goldengo Joltik box as we approach going forward. Enzor, like we saw, looking at the list that Gabriel Fernandez played to second, I think we're going to see some versions that can counter the metagame, but I wouldn't necessarily look at it as this is always a strong deck. I think it's more of a meta choice, and that's what it takes to sometimes win the World Championships. One thing players forget about the World Championships is you have all of the exact best players in the room, and sometimes they make bold calls. Bold calls can sometimes win matchups. If you're playing Enzor against Goldengo, you might not be able to win without the Toad Scroll. Something like that could be really good in a small field. However, you're going to a large field where there's 2,000 plus masters at Pittsburgh, Toad Scroll might not be as strong because you could run into other decks. We see some other decks here. Terror Box starting to become a little bit more popular. The only one in Masters that made it was Alex Szymanski, very strong player, playing a 1/1 copy of Leafeon. I've seen some other players like Rahul Reddy at Locals playing Terror Box, winning some League Cups here and there. I think they're ending up cutting the Leafeon for a card like Briar or just other tech cards in their deck. So I wouldn't be surprised if players continue to play something like Terror Box as these decks are kind of taking Shaman out. Certainly an interesting opportunity there. And we also saw Ho Armor Rouge being able to make top 32 at the event. I think this is the type of deck where it's do or die mentality, and they had a really cool day. Being able to play the Pekka and the Monkey Dory with Legacy Energy can mean Monkey Dory could be a 0 prize card Pokemon, and you just move all the energies around, giving yourself an opportunity to have all these different types of attackers, similar to an Eevee or a Terra Box, just with more energy manipulation. And it plays the new Prism energies, making it a decent enough interesting choice. Just a lot of different Pokemon, and I think this deck can kind of clump up at some times. There's some other players who played it did not make top 32. Blissey was an interesting choice from our previous world champion, Fernando Cifuentes, looking to counter those Dragapult decks, those Goldengo decks, but probably taking a loss to decks like Gardevoir. Really strong player. This is very similar to what they came second with at the Monterey Regional Championships. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw more decks like this pop up. We've also seen Kaparaja pop up at some League Cups as well. And last but not least, we have Milotic Walls decks. Now, we had it make top 4 in the younger divisions. We've seen wall decks do well before. Sometimes players have counters, sometimes they don't. I think the underlying theme is players are trying to block popular Pokemon with Pokemon like Cornerstone Ogerpon. I'm going to go ahead and turn back on my camera. So this leaves us for our Worlds metagame. I think it's really interesting. I'm going to put the link in the description so you can kind of copy and paste these lists as you like. We have the complete version of the decks. And if you go over to the tools on the Limitless website and click into labs, you can click the World Championships and you can see any player that you want. Even, if we turn off the filter, I was like, unfortunately, I did not have the strongest day, but if we look at there, you can even look at my day where I had a tough day playing against a few players that ended up making day 2. But the Goldengos did not necessarily go my way. So you can look at any players, even those that did not necessarily have the strongest day at Worlds. The Limitless Labs is often not necessarily looked into as much as other players look into the regular Limitless website. So be sure to check that out. As for me, I'm preparing for League Cups, League Challenges in the Montreal area. I'm signed up for Monterey, Pittsburgh, Milwaukee, and I'm really excited because I'm going to go to Buenos Aires for the first time alongside LAIC. Granted, I get into both of those tournaments. We're going to be back to somewhat regularly scheduled programming here on the Shuffle Squad. Like I said, I got back from Worlds and it took us a lot longer to get back than expected. I think some kind of post-travel, not like a bug or anything. I haven't felt sick. I've just been a little bit exhausted coming back. Being a new parent traveling with an infant for like 48 hours will take down the confidence of anyone. But we're home, we're happy, we're safe. As much as I didn't do as well as I did the World Championships, I had some amazing games, and it's just games that I came up a little bit short or my opponent ended up having the cards necessary. Sometimes that's the format. There's a lot of players that I look up to that didn't necessarily even do as well as I did. So it's sometimes relieving, but I'm back. I'm playing a full season of Pokemon. I'm really excited for it. So if you're trying to get any coaching, hit me up. And other than that, we will catch up with all of y'all later. Much love, peace out, and have a great day. Want to support the Shuffle Squad? Be sure to check out all of our sponsors in the description to pick up Pokemon TCG singles, sealed, and PTCG live codes.
「旅の始まりは常に道への一歩である。それは闇へと続く。初めの一歩を踏み出すには勇気がいる。そして旅の終わりには旅を始めた時の自分とは別人になっているかもしれない。旅に出よう。物語の次の章がお主を待っている。将軍の道を歩め。侍の箱とともに。アルティメットガードが送る冒険の第一章。刀将軍の道近日発売。
Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed the content that we have today, and maybe you'll click on one of these other videos, enjoy those videos too. If you haven't already, give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments what video you want to watch next. Until next time, we'll catch up with all y'all later. Have yourself a great day.